Hello and welcome back, everyone, to the Winning Edge podcast, a podcast where we interact with the nation's best high school and collegiate athletes to explore their experiences academically, socially, and athletically. My name is Eshaan and I'm your host on today's show. Today, here with us, we are accompanied by Sanil Sharma, a competitive fencer at UC San Diego. So, with that, hi, Sanil, and how are you doing today?
I'm doing great actually. I just finished a midterm, so school's in full swing right now. Practices are going well. We're in season. What about you? How are you doing?
Yeah, that's great to hear. I'm doing great actually. My midterm is next week. But yeah, really looking forward to today's conversation. But kind of before we carry on though, I want to start out with a few opening questions so that the audience and I kind of get to know you a bit better. So, how old were you when you started competing in fencing? How long have you been practicing, and how often are you competing or training these days?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I started fencing when I was 10 years old on February 23rd, so 2 weeks after my birthday. And I started fencing because I originally wanted to do archery because I saw the Avengers movie and I was like, oh, Hawkeye's so cool. Like, I really want to do archery.
Hmm.
But the closest archery club to my house was an hour away. And my mom said that she did not want to drive me an hour away just for a 2 hour practice and then an hour back. 4 hours of her time, gas is expensive, and it's a lot of time out of her day. She's working. So she told me to pick the next best thing, and there it was, fencing, which was only 15 minutes from my house.
Hmm. Yeah. So, also, I want to ask, how often are you competing or training these days now that you're in college?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I train 5 days a week, every weekday from 8 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. And then we have mandatory lift Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 11:30 to 1 p.m.
Got it. Nice. Yeah. So I also play competitive tennis for my school's varsity team and also on the USTA circuit. So yeah, pretty much with the introductions taken care of, I want to delve into our first topic for today, which is, fencing is a sport which not a lot of people frankly know about, right? It's not like the NBA or basketball or like even, soccer, right? It's not like has the global scale audience like those sports. So with that in mind, not a lot of people have actually seen it, live. I personally have never actually seen a full fencing match. And I know for a fact that a lot of my audience also hasn't seen a full fencing match. So, Sanil, can you kind of describe exactly what the game of fencing is to our audience? Can you explain how it's played, how the scoring works, how a winner is determined, all the stuff like that?
Yeah, of course. So in fencing, there are three different weapons, and we're going to focus. I will talk about the weapon that I do, which is called epee, EPEE. And in that weapon, the whole body is the target. So you can hit me in the hand, you can hit me in the foot, the chest, the face, and it all counts as 1 point. For a match, you have to score 5 points. So I have to hit you 5 times before you hit me 5 times with a 3 minute clock. Um, Regarding fencing, competition wise, the way it works is that there's a preliminary round. So let's say there are 100 fencers.
Mhm.
There's going to be like a pool format. So it's going to be groups of seven and then like groups of six to get to 100. And then in that 7 person or 6 person pool, you fence everybody to 5 touches. After that, they take all of the fencers and put them on a seating with whoever has won the most matches, which we call bouts. So whoever has won the most bouts is at the top, and then only 75% of the people in the seating go on to the second round, which is an incomplete tableau or a complete tableau of however many rounds are needed. So if there are like 100 fencers, only 75 fencers make it. Then you start off in the round of 128, and then you move down to 64s, 32s, 16s, quarters, semis, then finals. And
Yeah,
in the
that's
secondary round, sorry, my bad. In the
mhm,
secondary
no problem.
round, it's a 15 touch bout, and there's 3 periods of 3 minutes.
Nice. Yeah. And also, I was just curious, but could you also maybe explain the other two weapons? I know you said that there were three, and that you specialize in one. I was just wondering, what are those other three, combat weapons?
Yeah, of course. So the other two weapons are called foil and saber. Epee and foil are both weapons where you are supposed to like point, like you're supposed to poke, whereas saber is slashing. So you can like cut diagonally or
I
horizontally or
see.
vertically. And in saber and foil, there's this rule called right of way, which is basically only the attacking fencer or the fencer with priority can score. So whereas in epee, if we both hit each other at the same time, we both get a point. In a foil and saber, whoever has the right of way gets the point. So even if both fencers score, if one of them has the right of way, then they get the point.
I see. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that explanation. That was a really great explanation. And I can definitely now, understand the game of fencing a lot more. So yeah, thank you for that. And so you're kind of transitioning a bit here, I guess you kind of answered this a little bit in the introduction, but I do want to ask you, Sano, with fencing being sort of a limited accessibility sport in the US, right? Again, it's not the most mainstream. I do want to ask, what sparked your love for fencing despite it not being the most mainstream? Or I guess, what do you enjoy most about fencing, which made you pursue it, to such a high level?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that question. Something I really love about fencing, which is different from a lot of sports, is that it's purely individual.
Hmm.
You know, in a team sport like basketball, it's 5-on-5. You can't win the game by yourself. You have to rely on your teammates. There's four other people that can help you or, not help you. In fencing, and it's not like a sport like, for example, that's like purely off of just like your physicality or like your genetics. Like track, for example, where it's just running, like you just like whoever is like the fastest, whoever is like the strongest, they're
Yep.
able to do the best. In fencing, it doesn't matter how tall you are, how like slim or athletic you are. It's all about your strategy and your technique and your timing and your distance. And anyone can be good at fencing, and it's all on you to win the bout. There's no one else that can help you. It's all on you to, win, get to the top, and do your best. And I really love that because I love to compete. I'm a really big competitor, and I love being able to, control the match and me being the only person that can decide if I win or lose.
Hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's definitely a very great response to what you just said. I think that, me being a tennis player, I also resonate with how when you win, right, you take all the credit. But when you lose, you take all the blame. And it's not for everyone having that double-edged sword kind of, component to the sport. So I definitely think that in that way, fencing, people that really want to have that agency, have that full control over how the game is played, the direction of it, definitely will gravitate to a more solo sport like fencing. So yeah, that's actually a pretty good segue into my next question, which is, you know, I wanted to talk a little bit about the individualistic component of fencing. I know that from personal experience with solo sports that, fencing, despite its individual nature, it's very important in terms of relationships and mentoring, on the skill set and the emotional feedback, um, sort of sides, right? So, can you kind of talk about the role that mentorship has played in your journey as a student athlete? Can you kind of discuss the importance of having a supportive mentor and how it's influenced your personal and athletic development?
Yeah, definitely. I just want to say, first of all, I would never have made it as far as I have without the help of my coaches and my teammates and my parents who have supported me throughout this journey. I have learned so much from the coaches that I've had, specifically my first coach, Coach Alexander, my now coach at UCSD, Coach Juan Ignacio, and the coach that I train at as well outside of UCSD, Coach K. Um, those three have played a vital role in not just my fencing, but me becoming a better person, my morals, my discipline, and really telling me to focus on not just fencing, but other things, such as like school, my life, my relationship, my family, and they have helped me so much.
Hmm.
Um, in regards specifically to school, I think, fencing being such an individual sport, I take, like you said, when you mentioned, oh, you take all the credit and you take all the blame. It really taught me a lot about taking responsibility and not blaming others for my own faults. I used to have that problem a lot when I was a kid, or I would make excuses and I would try to, say, oh, it wasn't me, it was this factor that caused it.
Mhm.
And that, doing fencing and, with the help of my mentors, it taught me a lot to have that self-discipline and say, I need to work on myself. I need to do this. And once I correct that, I know I'll be able to go forward.
Yeah, no, for sure. I thought that you gave almost a perfect response to that question because I feel like a sport like fencing teaches you a lot of life skills, right? It teaches you a lot about discipline, responsibility, and most importantly, I feel like maturity, honestly, because you grow a lot as an individual through a solo sport like fencing, where it's just you are essentially commanding your own ship, and it's up to you to essentially steer how you want to develop as not just a person or not just a player, but also as a person, right? So I think that the impact of a coach or a mentor is going to get amplified so much because it's an individual sport, right? So yeah, I definitely thought that you gave a great answer to that. And so yeah, kind of transitioning on here, I want to talk about fencing. Unlike typical games, when you hear the word sport, fencing is more, evasive movements, a lot of like quick little steps and things like that, right? So essentially, the movements that you perform as a fencer are a lot different to the type of athletic movements that you might see a basketball player do or a swimmer do, right? So this brings me to the question, Sanil. What do your workouts typically look like when you're training in fencing? What are some of the most important muscle areas in fencing? What kind of drills or exercises you're performing? Kind of talk about that.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm actually really interested in this topic because, I'm a general biology major, and something that am considering pursuing is, physical therapy and, kinesiology, pre-PT path. And I always ask questions to my athletic trainers and my coaches who are, doing these workouts, like what I need to work on.
Mhm.
One example is for fencing, and obviously you have a blade, you're trying to stab. You need to be able to hit your target. So there's a lot of hand-eye coordination that we do. Just simple, like with the tennis ball, you put it on your hand, you pop it up to your elbow, and you have to catch it with like a move. Another thing is, if you're moving laterally back and forth, moving a tennis ball from one cone to another, really
Mhm.
training that hand-eye coordination so that when you see something, you're able to use your hand and be able to pick a target.
Mhm. Yeah.
In terms of moving like evasive maneuvers, like you said, fencing is all lateral. It's not side to side, it's all forward and back. So your legs are quite literally the engine of, you know, what you're doing. If you don't have the legs to support your fencing, you won't be able to do as well as you need to be.
Mhm.
So a lot of movements that we do is a lot of pushing movements and a lot of movements that cause you to have to push forward really quickly and be able to recover just as fast. Especially if I'm trying to attack my opponent, I'm trying to go in and I'm not trying to get them to hit me. I need to be able to push off and go back as far as possible. So trap bar deadlifts, medicine ball slams, split
Mm.
squats, stuff with like slider curls where you do reverse lunges and you're really trying to focus on that stability. It's really important.
Mhm.
In terms of muscles that really help with fencing, you need to have really strong adductors and you need to be really flexible
Mm.
because I don't know if you know, but in fencing, there's like a lunge. And in the lunge, you're kicking forward with your front leg and you're pushing off with your back leg. And you're trying to like push forward into like an athletic lunge to hit your
Mhm.
opponent.
Yeah.
So if you're not flexible, you won't be able to reach as far of a distance as you need to. And if you're not strong, you won't be able to recover from that really stretched out distance, you know? So adductors, quads, hips, those are all incredibly important when it comes to pushing your body forward in that movement.
Mhm. Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely think that that flexibility aspect is something almost unique to fencing. I'm not gonna say totally unique, but definitely it's something that is much more emphasized in a sport like fencing, right? Because so much of your skill component is reliant on having that flexibility, right? Having that dexterity where you can be strong but also slender and flexible, right? So yeah, I think in a way that also relates to tennis a lot because tennis is not a pure power sport. It's a lot of finesse.
A lot of movement.
Yeah. Exactly. It's very similar to fencing in that sense. So yeah. And yeah, kind of segueing off what we just talked about, one topic I really wanted to explore when it comes to competitive fencing is how juniors are able to progress through the different levels, right? So local, regional, national levels, when you look around, you don't typically see fencing clubs or programs like advertised as often as other sports, right? You don't really see fencing out in the public, whereas for sports like basketball or football, go to any park or gym, you'll see people playing, right? So this brings me to the question, how would a youth fencer be able to get started with fencing if they, don't know where to start, I guess? How are the national rankings for fencing? Kind of talk us through that junior development process.
Yeah, no worries. And I think you brought up a really good question because it is really hard to find fencing accessible in many areas, especially in the USA. Because fencing, quite honestly, it's an expensive sport. We're trying to, USA fencing and, the FIE, like the International Fencing Federation, are trying to find ways to make it more affordable and more accessible. But it's really hard because, like you said, you need equipment to fence. You can't just, you know, get a basketball and go to a basketball court, which is already
Yeah.
there, and start playing, or, bring a soccer ball to an open field. You have to have the proper equipment. You have to have the proper, technology, like the scoring boxes and machines, because like what are you gonna do? You need to have like
Mhm.
strips, or you need to have like an area to do that. For me and for the junior development process, there are a lot of clubs in the Bay Area and also around the US. If you go on usafencing.org, you can find local clubs near you and get started with fencing. At the local level, there are a lot of local tournaments that you can find, like at least once or one or two every month. And then, once you start getting your feet wet, once you want to, progress through the levels, there are regional tournaments, which are, qualified regional tournaments that are through USA Fencing. And then with those, you can get points to qualify for Junior Olympics or national events. And then with that, you can get national points and be on the national ranking. And there are different age groups. There's, youth 12, so youth 10, youth 14, cadets, which is youth 16, and juniors, which is U20. And then at the senior level is it's any age, you have to be good enough.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of like national tournaments and the national like selection process, there are 8 national events every single year throughout the season because fencing is a year-long sport. It's very long, with the national events occurring once a month roughly. And then, getting good standings like consistently, you can get up on the national standing and be able to travel internationally for competitions.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think you broke it down, almost like seamlessly, right? That was really easy to follow. I definitely got a sense of that progression through the different levels. That was very insightful. So yeah, thank you for that. I think that for a lot of aspiring juniors, I think it kind of gives them reassurance that, despite it's not being so like easy to play as another sport, I think there's definitely, always options out there. So yeah, thank you for that. And so yeah, that kind of brings me to this next topic actually. So to those who have actually seen how fencing is played, it almost seems like very, very bizarre, right? Like you and your opponent are standing on opposite ends, kind of almost doing nothing, and then all of a sudden, like someone strikes, right? So it's a very back and forth, very all of a sudden kind of sport, right? So I'd assume it requires a lot of endurance, a lot of fitness, a lot of, finesse as well. So I think that because of those qualities, people forget the technical side of like the sport, which involves like the footwork, the timing, the technique. You know, Considering both sides of the game, would you say that fencing is more of an endurance sport or more of a tactical sport? Um,
It's definitely 100% more tactical. To an untrained eye or to someone who doesn't follow fencing, it can look super random. Like I completely understand what you're saying. Even when I watch foil and saber, which are like weapons I don't do, sometimes I'll be like, what just happened? Why did he go there? How did he score? It's like it's confusing to people who do different weapons as well. You
mhm.
just have to get used to it. And I think that's something that's very underrated about fencing because it's very tactical, very technical. And once you understand the game and once you can see fencing properly, it opens up your entire perception of fencing and you can improve a lot quicker.
Mhm.
For example, let's say there are two fencers and they're both moving side to side, and like I said, one of them suddenly attacks. There's a reason for that. They didn't just go for no reason. Maybe they saw their opponent was hesitating, they were going a little slower, and they, were giving them a false step back and going. Maybe the opponent was trying to do, they were testing out reactions and they were doing something unconsciously, and you saw the moment and you went. And it's hard to realize that unless you're really focusing and really paying attention.
Wow,
And I think
okay.
that's a very underrated aspect of fencing. It's
Yeah, no, for
incredibly
sure.
tactical.
Yeah, for sure. I think that that's also something that comes with a lot of like just understanding the sport, like you said. And so kind of off that, I do want to ask kind of as a follow-up question, what do you believe, being the level or rather the caliber of a fencer that you are, what are some of the most important qualities of a fencer that they should have to be really successful?
That's a really good question. I think that something fencers should have to be successful is, concentration,
Hmm.
focus.
Okay.
They need to be able to manage their breathing because a lot of times when you're fencing for a long time, you get really tired and you're just like, man, I just want to go and attack. Like, I'm so tired. I've been moving so long. I'm just going to do something and see if it works.
Hmm.
And more often than not, it doesn't work because the opponent was more
Yeah.
patient than you. And they were just waiting for that moment when you lose concentration, you slip up, and they strike. So having patience and having concentration is incredibly important. That mental toughness is incredibly underrated because if you're just going and you're not seeing opportunities and you're trying to rush for a touch, you won't be able to score. You'll get more frustrated, which will lead to more mistakes, and it'll just create a downward spiral.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I think that that was honestly like the perfect way to summarize. Having that component of concentration is so important. Kind of just me realizing because I have the untrained eye, right? I don't follow fencing like that, but just from knowing what I know about fencing, concentration and patience is such a big factor to the sport. And it's almost like I would relate it in a sense, the mental side at least to a sport like chess, where you lapse for a second when you're in the middle of your opening or mid game or whatever, and boom, your opponent suddenly takes your queen or takes your rook, and you're essentially on the verge of losing your match. So yeah, I think having that patience, but also honing that aggressiveness, knowing when to let go of that patience and attack at the right moment is something that takes a lot of skill and a lot of work. So yeah. So yeah, kind of averting a bit from the thread of the nuance and the, untrained eye of fencing, I want to talk about the mental side of fencing. So I feel like in the case of individual sports, I feel like fencing in particular, because the movements are so sudden and things happen really quickly, the mental fortitude is a really big aspect to the sport, right? So, from a player's point of view, can you kind of speak on just how important it is to be mentally resilient in a sport like fencing? How big of a role does it actually play in who ultimately ends up winning?
Yeah, that's honestly like a really good question. And I think going back to what you mentioned about chess, a lot of people and fencing is known as physical chess because, like you said, that one momentary lapse and it's over. And the same goes true with, mental resilience, mental toughness. I have seen a lot of fencers, and me personally, this has happened sometimes, a lot of times actually, where you're neck and neck with your opponent. It's really close bout. You lose, one touch, one moment, and you're like, oh, I know I should have done this. And you just keep thinking about it and you're not focused for the rest of the bout. You're not thinking about the next touch. You haven't
Mm,
moved on. You're still thinking about that one touch that you lost, and then the opponent just takes the match. I'm sure you've also had that happen to you in tennis.
yeah, no, for sure.
15-15, you guys are having a really long rally. Maybe, you didn't go as far, you didn't put enough power on it, and the opponent hits a nice winner, and you're just thinking, man, like that should have been mine. And then boom, they score two more serves, and now they've won the set.
Yeah,
It's
for
same
sure,
goes,
for
same
sure.
goes with fencing. I know this happened to me a lot where I was actually up in a match 10-6 with 30 seconds left. and I had just relaxed. I was like, 30 seconds left in the third period. It's 10-6, 4-point game. All I have to do is just sit back. They're gonna come to me. I'm just gonna, counterattack. It's epic. If we both hit each other, we both get a point. So I'll just get 5 doubles in a row and I'll win the match. And in those 30 seconds, the opponent actually came back and had to go into a priority minute, which is when the score is tied at the end of the match. You flip a coin, and whoever side it lands on, they get priority. And then for 1 minute, if nobody scores, the person with priority wins. And I lost, and I ended up losing that match in priority. And this was at a national competition. And I
Wow.
remember thinking, oh, like all of this could have been avoided if I just told myself to the bout's not over until it's over and to not relax. And I just let that moment slip away from me for 1 moment. And then, 10-6, oh, he scores. 10-7, oh, I'm fine. Still 3 points. Oh, 10-8, okay, now I'm starting to panic. Okay, let's be more serious. Oh, 10-9, okay, now I'm really scared. I'm fencing very tense. I'm not ready, I'm being very reactive. I don't know what the opponent's gonna do. And then they score again and we're in priority. Now my entire mind just thinking about, oh no, like it was 10-6 just 30 seconds ago. What happened? The bout should be over. I should have won. And I should have just said, 10-6, 10-10, that's fine. I just need to focus on this one priority touch. But I was just still thinking about what could have been or what was, I was already up and I lost the match.
Yeah, no, definitely. That was like a great anecdote that you brought up how when you're so focused on the past, right, you essentially lose presence or focus for the future, right? So I think in a sport like fencing, that is an extremely like important aspect to be able to move on and not get caught up in the past. And like you said, in instances where you're up, 10-6, you're essentially, resting on your laurels. You think you won it, but then all of a sudden, when your opponent gets 2 touches in a row, it's 10-8, you start to panic a little bit. And then, that panic spirals and spirals. And, soon enough, you lost a match that basically should have been yours. Right. So I think in moments like those, it's really important to train the mind to be able to navigate out of those situations. Right. So this actually leads me on to my next question. So, kind of on the flip side of things, I know we just talked about how mentality is super important to winning a match, but mentality can also lose you a match oftentimes. I know that sometimes, or this was actually a really big challenge that I faced when I first started out with tennis, but oftentimes before a match, I used to get really nervous because I was
Hmm.
facing a lower ranked player and I felt like I needed to win this, right? I had that pressure of being the better player and having the expectation to essentially like win it. And having that expectation actually was counterproductive because I played worse due to that expectation. So, can you kind of talk about how you deal with these mental struggles during your matches, you know, to kind of overcome that nervousness sometimes?
Yeah, you brought up a great point. I think that's something that, every athlete faces, no matter the sport, when they see someone that they think in their mind, oh, I should be able to beat this person. And then they get super stressed and they perform at the level of that person.
Yes,
That's very
exactly.
true in fencing. A lot of times, and I still have this problem sometimes where I'll see a fencer and I'll get cocky, and that's only due to my arrogance, right? When you're at a high level, everyone is good. Everyone has a chance to beat everyone. There's no such thing as a bad or worse fencer. The only reason people say that is because of their own arrogance and because they simply just think they're the best. And I don't think that's a good mentality to have.
Because of a
And when you have,
ranking or like a rating,
exactly,
even. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And, with that pressure where you think you're a better fencer, you end up fencing at the level of your opponent because you're scared. You think, oh, like if they get one touch on you, or if they get one lucky touch, you start overthinking. You're like, oh, like they shouldn't be able to do this. I don't have to try as hard. They're not that good. I don't have to put my full effort. When in reality, it doesn't matter who the opponent is. You need to try your best regardless.
Mhm.
And that's happened to me quite a number of times where I've thought that, oh, I'm a better fencer than this person. I should be able to win. And I don't take the match seriously. I'm not concentrated. I'm not focused. I'm not putting in my full effort. And I end up losing the match, or I end up down a lot of points in the beginning of the match because I wasn't taking it seriously.
Mhm.
So I think for fencers who do struggle with that, and for myself, what I like to tell myself is it doesn't matter who the opponent is. You're gonna treat every fencer like it's the same. You're gonna go through the same process. If they end up having something that you could exploit, okay, that's fine. It doesn't matter if, they have very large technical knowledge or if they're not as technically advanced, you're still going to take the same steps and you're not going to cut any corners to like save energy. Do you
Mhm.
understand?
Yeah, no, totally. I think that the parallel between fencing and tennis is almost like it's just unbelievable because the way you talked about how you actually end up stooping down to the level of your opponent, because your nervous conscience just isn't able to like focus and play or allow you to play at the level that you want to, and that's only a product of how you perceive your opponent, right? Imagine you're playing opponent that, let's say you're ranked 100, your opponent's ranked 120. Oh, you feel like I should be able to beat this person, but it could be the exact same player. And if his number was 80 instead of 120, it's going to affect how you play. And I feel like that sort of like external like influence that's not even related to your own game, how that like dictates your performance is something that requires a lot of effort for athletes to overcome. It's definitely something that's very challenging. It comes with a lot of experience, and even then, experienced players still struggle with that. So I think that, like you said, reminding yourself that you need to treat every match or every game like you're preparing for the same player is really, really important. So yeah, I definitely thought that you provided a great response to that. And so yeah, kind of staying on the same thread, I feel like, you know, any sport, whether it be tennis, football, volleyball, there's always some sort of stereotype or misconception that is, sort of consensus by other people for the sport, right? So people tend to view a sport a certain way just because that's kind of the culture around it, or like that's how it seems on the surface level, right? So I've heard, you know, drawing a comparison to football, I've heard a lot of people say football is like a brainless sport. Like where is the strategy in a football? Like you just kind of collide into players and like try to tackle each other. Like, oh, you don't need any sort of IQ to play. And then, in a sport like tennis, people say like, oh, is it even a real sport? Like it just what you're not running that much, you don't need that much muscle, right? Like is it, you don't even need to be athletic to play it. So and then there's a sport like volleyball. People say, oh, it's a girl sport, right? So there's a lot of people that say stuff like that. So kind of drawing parallel to a sport like fencing, what do you believe is like a very big perception about fencing that's just outright not true? And why do you think that people see fencing potentially in this way?
Yeah, I think common stereotype that I've heard a lot is that fencing is not really an athletic sport. And, anyone can do fencing as well as, it's, not like, oh, real athletes don't do fencing, like do a real sport.
Hmm.
I think with any sport, when you get to a high level, everyone's going to be physically trained, everyone's going to be conditioned, and everything takes a lot of time to be good at. You know, I think fencing, boxing are very similar with like
Hmm.
the way styles are and the way the movement works, but people respect boxing a lot more because it's just more mainstream. And I think if fencing were to be more mainstream and more people were to learn about it, and that's why I really loved when you reached out and asked me to be on your podcast, is because I want to spread the information on fencing a lot more.
Yeah,
I
for
want more
sure.
people to take fencing seriously and understand that, this is a sport that anyone can do, and also it's a sport that is very hard to do, and that at the top level, these are some of the best athletes in the world, regardless. It doesn't matter what sport it is, these guys and girls are incredibly talented, incredibly like incredible physical condition, mental condition, toughness, just I think that's just something I want to spread out. And I think, thank you so much for giving me the platform for that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that, like you said, a lot of people nowadays have to have like this certain like definition of what an athlete is. Like you need to be strong, fast, and like jump super high. Like the definition of an athlete is so diverse. Like there's not just one thing that makes up an athlete, right? Every sport requires different capabilities, different skill sets, right? Which is why I think that, sports is such a beautiful thing because there's just so much flexibility, so much freedom through this platform. And again, that's another reason why I was really excited to have you on this podcast because I wanted to really learn about kind of what the sport of fencing is about, what athletes in fencing do, I wanted to really learn about sports which are not so common, right? I think that's what makes sports so cool. Just how many sports there are and kind of, the different athletes that are bred through these different sports. So yeah, I mean, we're pretty much almost at the end of today's discussion, but I still do have a few more questions for you left, Sunil. So transitioning to a more academic space standpoint of things, I know that you are a fencer and you were recruited for UC San Diego's varsity fencing team. So, amongst many things, UCSD is a great choice for its academics, its locality, right? Its community opportunities, even its, amazing fencing team, right? So as a recruited athlete, can you kind of talk about why you chose UCSD, how you got recruited and how, you're sort of enjoying your time at UCSD?
Yeah. So UCSD, all the sports are Division 1, and I was incredibly lucky to be recruited to Division 1 university. We're actually a top 10 nation. Like our fencing team is top 10 in the nation for fencing, and it's a very, very, very strong program, and I'm very glad to be here. Regarding academics, my major is general biology. I am pre-med, so managing academics and fencing is always going to be a challenge because with medicine or pre-medicine, there's a lot of studying, a lot of memorization, lots of like really hard classes that you have to take,
Hmm.
and managing that with athletics takes a lot of time. You asked about my like recruitment process.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah, so when I was a sophomore in high school, I knew that I wanted to compete at the next level. I knew that I had the skill to do it and I had the ability and focus to reach that level. Even if maybe at my sophomore year, I wasn't at that level yet, I knew that with training, I could get there.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, COVID occurred during the middle of my sophomore year, and I wasn't able to fence for like a really long time, as were many students like during in my age. And then junior year, when things started to open up again, I started reaching out to colleges. I didn't have any film. I didn't have any videos of where my fencing skill was at currently. I only had videos from pre-COVID when I wasn't at the level I wanted to be. So a lot of my, you know, talks and discussions with college coaches ended at the first stage because a lot of them didn't believe in my skill because there weren't any tournaments for me to show them my skill, and there weren't any national tournaments for me to update my ranking. So I still was at a low ranking because I wasn't that good before COVID. Once tournaments started going back up, I kept contacting coaches as best as I could. And in one of our national tournaments, I ended up becoming the seventh ranked fencer in the cadet category. And I ended up
Hmm.
reaching the top 30 in the junior category after one tournament. And once I got that one result that I was really proud of, I was finally able to get responses from college
Hmm.
coaches. And a lot of them started hitting me up, and a lot of them started responding to my emails. And, you know, the talking stages developed. Ultimately, I ended up at UC San Diego because I really loved how much Coach Juan Ignacio stressed academics first. I love fencing, but fencing isn't always going to be everything in my life. At some point I have to, retire from the sport professionally or
Hmm.
competitively. And even though I still want fencing to be in my life forever, I need to be able to sustain myself, and I still need to have a career after that. And I really loved how Coach Juan Ignacio stressed academics and how you are a student first, you're a student athlete, not an athlete student. And that, grades are first and foremost. And I think that really helped me be on the right track to focus on academics. while
Mhm.
still doing the sport that I loved.
Yeah.
I got my verbal offer in March of my junior year. And then in November of my senior year, I signed my national letter of intent to attend UC San Diego.
Wow.
And
Okay.
that was the
Yeah.
process of how I got into college.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I think that like you said, the prospect of not being such a highly sought after athlete, prior to COVID and then during COVID even, I think that is something that would have maybe turned a lot of athletes' heads away. They would have been like, oh, this fencing gig is not for me. It's not worth the risk. I should just focus on my academics and see where that can take me. But I'm almost inspired by how you said that you were able to overcome that mental doubt, per se, and continue to improve your fencing, and you always had that belief that you could get to the Division 1 level even though you weren't at it yet. So I think honestly the fact that you show that mental resilience shows a lot about your character, and that's probably why you did end up coming to the level that you're at. And so yeah, I think that on top of that, what you said about academics and fencing, I do agree with you. Especially in a sport like fencing where there's not too much money, right? It's very hard to sustain yourself through fencing, where only like the top maybe less than 1% are able to make a career out of it, right? So I think having a degree to fall on, some academia to fall back on is really important, and UC San Diego certainly provides that. So yeah. And yeah, we're essentially at the end of today's episode, but before you go, Sunil, I did want to ask you, in the entire world of sports, who is your greatest idol or favorite player, and what do you sort of appreciate about them?
That's a really good question. So someone that I really looked up to and someone that I think I want to aspire to be is Kobe Bryant.
Hmm.
You know, I think he's incredibly dedicated to sport, one of the hardest workers ever. The dedication and the mentality and grit that he had, like Mamba mentality, is absolutely incredible. And, you know, I'm trying my best to get there, but it's really hard to
It's
work
really
hard.
hard, yeah.
It's really hard to work hard and have that dedication and focus. And he's always just someone that I aspire to be.
Hmm.
And I aspire to like work hard like him.
Hmm.
But I know that like, oh, me working hard is like his definition of like
Yeah.
taking like not even a day off, like post retirement. So,
Yeah.
I'm trying to, work harder and have more discipline. But he's always someone that I look up to.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that especially once you ascend the levels of sports and you get to that national Division 1 level, you start to appreciate how truly unbelievable this guy actually is. Like when you're playing sports at a recreational level and you don't really understand what it means to train 3 hours every day, you're like, I mean, is that really that impressive what he's doing? But then once you actually are at that, elite level, you start to realize like this guy is unbelievable, which is why he's so good, right? I mean, I don't think Kobe,
Absolutely.
yeah, I don't think Kobe Bryant has like the genetics of a LeBron or like the basketball skill of like a Steph Curry, even, that natural talent. Everything he pretty much ironed out himself, right? So it's definitely very inspiring to see. And so yeah, I that pretty much wraps up today's discussion. I really want to thank you, Sanil, for your time and your support of this podcast. I really had a fun time chatting with you today, and I'm sure our audience learned a lot as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you so much as well for, talking with me, conversing with me, giving me the ability to talk about fencing and, give hope to other high school students, athletes who want to make it to the next level. I really appreciate what you're doing here, and I look forward to, your next couple of podcasts.
All right.